The House votes on its tax plan today. The Senate is debating its own version of the plan, and one Republican senator is publicly opposing it. That senator is Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, and he joins us now. I see you have your jacket off. You are going to work. I like the image, Senator.
Morning, Chris. Well, I'm Norwegian from Wisconsin. I get hot walking around pretty fast, so good morning.
Well, it is good to stay cool right now with all the things that you guys have facing you. Let's start with the moral question about Roy Moore. What is your position on the allegations against the senator, the Senate candidate?
Yeah, allegations sound pretty credible to me. And if I were Roy Moore, and I'm not, I would resign as being a candidate and give the Alabama voters what they want, a Republican candidate that will actually be seated in the United States Senate.
Well, now let's look at that just for one step, because people are arguing. Let the people decide. It's good to hear your position on it. You should be a moral leader. You were put there to make those kinds of judgments. However, let the voters decide. And if he wins, you would have a really tough task to expel him. The ethics committee hearings, the time, the distraction, who knows what happens. Wouldn't be that easy to unseat him. And should you have that ability to do that, or should the people just decide and not push Roy Moore out?
I think the Supreme Court has ruled that a duly elected senator needs to be sworn in, but then it's up to the body itself to decide whether we want to expel a member. And I'm just saying what the reality of the situation is based on the folks I'm talking to. I really seriously doubt that Judge Roy Moore would be serving as the United States Senator for very long. So he just needs to face that reality. And again, I think the voters of Alabama are quite clear. They want a Republican senator, not a Democrat one. He ought to take that into account.
All right, next issue. You came out and said, help the little guy as much as you're helping the big guy when it comes to corporate tax cuts. If you don't, I'm not for this bill. The president called you, true?
Yes, he did.
What did he say? Did he change your mind?
No, what he talked about is working with me, providing me the information so that we can work together to fix this problem. You know, the folks who wrote the framework for this tax reform realize that if we're going to make American businesses globally competitive, which we must do, it's table stakes. We need to make sure that every American company remains competitive, and we can't leave the pass-through businesses behind, which is why they came up with a 25% pass-through rate. The problem is neither the House nor the Senate version honored that 25% rate. It's far higher, and we are leaving those pass-through businesses behind. And those pass-through businesses really are the engine of economic growth, job creation, innovation in our economy. And so I'm just looking for a fair shake for all businesses to maintain the competitive balance and position of all businesses. Let's not upset that apple cart and harm our economy.
Well, it's interesting, the insight that you've gained here. It's kind of a metaphor effect into what one of the criticisms of the overall bill is that if you want to help the little guy, which the president keeps saying, it's about middle-class tax cuts, then the tax benefits should be overweighted to that group. This is a political decision, not an economic one, but that's not what the House bill does for sure, and it's not what the Senate bill does either. People like me, statement against self-interest here, get helped more than the middle class, which is supposedly what this cut's all about. Why?
Well, first of all, I think the tax proposal should all be weighted toward economic growth. We're $20 trillion in debt. Even with meager economic growth, Chris, revenue of the federal government has increased $1.2 trillion per year over 2009. So if you want to really address the debt and deficit issue, you need to grow our economy. And again, it's the pass-through businesses that really are a large portion of that economic growth. In the Senate bill, 82% of the tax relief for businesses goes to C Corps.
Right.
4% of the large businesses, only 18% go to pass-through entities.
Right. But that happens on the individual side also. I hear you on the corporate side. I get the righteousness of your cause. Let's see what happens. I'm saying the same is true on the individual side. You're helping people like me more than you're helping the middle class, and supposedly this was supposed to be about them.
Well, I'm a completely outlier when it comes to what we're doing on the individual side. I just wouldn't do what we're doing. I never promised anybody tax cuts because I'm one of those deficit hawks. We don't have enough revenue to pay for all of our expenses
then how can you
today.
be for this bill?
So what I'm for is economic growth, and that really is on the business side of the equation, making sure that all Americans are competitive against each other and globally, and grow our economy. That's how you actually increase wages on a self-sustaining basis.
Right, but the big sell on this, as you know, is trickle down.
Oh, I realize that.
I mean, that's what it is. They don't want to use that term because it's tainted from those big deficits we wound up with and that huge income disparity we ballooned during the Reagan years. But that's what it is. You give more money to people like me, and then I will use private investment to drive benefits to the middle class so they get a booster on top of whatever their actual tax cut is. Economically, it's dubious, and practically we've seen that it doesn't work that way every time. You shouldn't be guaranteeing it as an outcome. How can you be for this bill when it does exactly that?
Well, I'm not for the current version.
But because on the corporate side, what if they fix the corporate side and the individual side stays the same?
Well, what I want to see is the information to prove the kind of economic growth we're going to get with all of our tax provisions. And again, I think it's kind of a heavy lift to say on cutting individual taxes that really boosts economic growth. It does to a certain extent, but all the economic growth driving in this tax proposal is really on the business side with 100% expensing, so it's easier for businesses to expand and create more good-paying jobs, boost wages. Chris, we are at full employment, so we have just slightly more economic growth. That's going to put incredible upward pressure on wages. That's how you, again, increase wages, money in everybody's pocket, and revenue to the federal government.
Maybe, right? Because what do we see right now? You have corporations, not pass-throughs necessarily, but the bigger corporations are holding unprecedented amounts of cash. Senator, you know this. For the audience's edification,
which is
the
why
senator's
I want more,
background is in business. He's a businessman before he came in.
Again, Chris,
and they're
which is
not
why
raising
I want
wages. So giving them more cash doesn't necessarily mean that they'll raise wages.
Which is why I want more of the tax relief on the business side to flow to pass-through industries, because I really do believe they are the true engine of economic growth and job creation.
But why don't you do the same thing on the individual side? And if you're going to take a bite out of somebody's behind, it should be mine, because I have a bigger behind, metaphorically, in this situation, because I make more money, and give a bigger benefit to the middle class if that's what you want to do. Why isn't it that simple?
Because, first of all, Chris, again, I'm an outlier on this in terms of my party. I don't want to see any increase in the deficit through individual tax cuts. We have all these benefits we've promised to baby boomers. We are $20 trillion in debt. The projected deficit over the next 30 years is over $100 trillion, maybe as much as $129 trillion. This isn't, from my standpoint, it's not time to cut individual tax rates. What it's time to do is make American businesses competitive globally so our economy can grow. And again, the stat that I just told you about.
Right.
Revenues increased the federal government by $1.2 trillion per year, even with the meager economic growth we've had since 2009. That's really the number one component of the solution here. Again, I'm an outlier. I understand that. But we really need to make sure that the American economy realizes the full potential.
Greenspan agrees with you. He says now is not the time for tax cuts. Gary Cohn was at a symposium, and he listened to all these CEOs, said, you give us more money, we're going to give it back to the shareholders. It's going to be passed through in dividends. So there's a lot to be argued out here. Senator Johnson, the same promise as always. When you've got the numbers, when you want to make the case about why this is good for the American people, you've got time right here.
Well, hopefully the president will help me get that information. I'll come on in there with our Year Wonder Board one more time.
Let's get it on. Take care. Allison.
Have a great day.